Nobody even looked at her twice. A broken mare, limping, ribs showing, eyes full of something no one cared to understand. The auction crowd laughed when she stumbled. She won't last a week, they said. But one cowboy didn't laugh. He saw something quiet, something stubborn. Maybe it was the way she refused to fall, even when every step hurt. Maybe it was the way she looked straight at him, like she was asking for one last chance. Against all logic, against all advice, he bought her. What he didn't know, that broken, forgotten mare, was about to change everything. The mare stumbled as they dragged her into the center of the auction ring, her hooves scraping against the wooden floor, each step uneven and painful. A low murmur spread through the crowd, quickly turning into laughter. Someone in the back scoffed, loud enough for others to hear, and just like that, she became a joke. Heads shook. Eyes rolled. No one stepped forward. No one saw value. Her coat was dull, almost lifeless, patches of dried mud clinging to her sides. A thin layer of ribs showed beneath her skin, rising and falling with every strained breath. Old scars traced across her legs, and one of them dragged slightly behind, refusing to carry its share of weight. But her eyes didn't match the rest of her. They weren't empty. They weren't defeated. They were steady, alert, almost defiant, as if she hadn't accepted what everyone else already had. "Won't last a week," a man muttered, drawing a few chuckles. "Waste of feed," another added. The auctioneer tried to keep things moving, his voice loud and practiced, but even he sounded less convinced this time. He called for bids anyway, lowering the price almost immediately. Silence answered him. Boots shuffled. Someone coughed. The mare shifted her weight again, nearly losing balance before catching herself. More laughter followed. At the edge of the crowd stood a man who didn't laugh. He hadn't said a word since the mare entered. His hat was pulled low, shadowing his face, but his eyes were fixed on her, watching, studying, noticing what others didn't bother to see. He didn't look at her scars first. He didn't focus on the limp. He watched the way she held herself together despite it all. The way she refused to collapse, even when her body clearly wanted to. He looked out of place among the others, not because of how he dressed, but because of how still he was. While others whispered and mocked, he stayed quiet, almost distant. There was something heavy in that silence, something shaped by years that hadn't been kind. The lines on his face told their own story. Loss, long days, longer nights. A ranch that wasn't doing as well as it should. Bills that didn't wait. Empty spaces where something, or someone, used to be. The auctioneer called again, lowering the price even further. Anyone? Even a starting bid? Nothing. The mare's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, and for a brief second, she turned her head, not to the crowd, but toward that quiet man at the edge. Their eyes met. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it lingered. Something about that moment didn't make sense, and yet it did. The man shifted slightly, almost as if he were about to step forward, then hesitated. Around him, the whispers continued. "No one's that desperate," someone said. "Better off putting her down." The auctioneer sighed, ready to move on. And that's when the man raised his hand. It wasn't fast. It wasn't confident. But it was enough. The room quieted just a little, surprised that anyone had spoken at all. The auctioneer blinked, then nodded quickly, calling out the bid as if afraid it might disappear. No one challenged it. No one wanted to. A second passed. Then another. Sold. Just like that, it was done. A few people laughed again, softer this time, more amused than before. Others shook their heads, already deciding what kind of fool would spend money on a horse like that. As the man stepped forward to claim her, someone called out, "You just bought yourself a problem." Another voice followed, "Should have saved your money." He didn't respond. Didn't argue. He simply reached for the rope, his eyes flicking once more to the mare. Up close, she looked even worse, but somehow, that didn't change anything. If anything, it made his decision feel heavier. And as he led her away, the doubt followed right behind him. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was already dipping low, casting long shadows across land that had clearly seen better days. The fence leaned in places where posts had rotted. The barn door hung slightly off its hinges, creaking in the wind. Dust covered almost everything, and the field stretched out dry and tired, like they had given up trying. It wasn't just the mare that looked broken, this place did too. He led her through the gate slowly, careful not to rush her. Every few steps, she faltered, her injured leg trembling under the strain. More than once, she stopped completely, breathing hard, unsure if she could go any farther. He didn't pull. Didn't force her. He just waited, standing there in the quiet, giving her the time no one else had. Inside the barn, he cleared a small space, brushing away old hay and debris. It wasn't much, but it was dry, and it was safe. He tied her loosely, making sure she had room to move, then stepped back for a moment, studying her the same way he had at the auction. Up close, the damage was worse than he thought. Cuts that hadn't healed right. Bruises fading into darker scars. That limp, it wasn't just temporary. He ran a hand over his face, exhaling slowly. Money was already tight, too tight for mistakes like this. The ranch hadn't been doing well for months. Maybe longer. Bills were stacking up, and the last decent horse he had was sold just to keep things going a little while longer. This wasn't a smart decision. Everyone back in town had been right about that. But still, he grabbed a bucket of water. The mare flinched when he came close, her body tensing, eyes sharp again, but not wild. Just cautious. He moved slowly, speaking under his breath, not expecting her to understand the words, only the tone. It took time, but eventually she let him get close enough to clean one of the wounds. She jerked once, then stilled. It wasn't smooth after that. The next morning, she barely touched the feed he left. By afternoon, she tried to move too quickly and nearly collapsed, catching herself at the last second. Another time, she refused to let him near at all, turning away, ears pinned, as if she had already decided he wasn't worth trusting. Days passed like that. Small efforts, small failures. One evening, he found her lying down, breathing harder than usual. For a moment, something in his chest tightened. He stepped closer, slower this time, kneeling beside her. "Don't," he muttered quietly, more to himself than to her. "Don't quit now." For a second, it felt like he wasn't just talking to her. Memories slipped in, uninvited. The empty house. The silence that followed after everything fell apart. The long nights where sleep didn't come easy. The feeling of losing things you couldn't get back, no matter how hard you tried. He pushed the thought away, focusing on her again. She didn't get up right away, but she didn't close her eyes either. She just looked at him. And this time, there was something different in it. Less fear, maybe. Or maybe just less distance. The next day, she stood a little longer before resting. The day after that, she took a few more steps without stumbling. Small things. Easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But he was. Word still traveled back into town. When he stopped by for supplies, the looks hadn't changed much. A few smirks. A few quiet comments that weren't meant to be quiet enough. "Still got that horse?" someone asked, barely hiding the amusement. He didn't answer. Just paid and left. Back at the ranch, the work continued. Slow. Careful. Frustrating at times. But steady. And then one morning, as the sun crept over the horizon, he stepped into the barn expecting the same routine, only to pause. The mare was already standing. Not shaking. Not struggling. Just standing there, balanced, her weight held a little more evenly than before. It wasn't perfect. Not even close. But it was the first time she looked stronger. The days settled into a quiet rhythm, the kind that didn't look like much from the outside but carried weight in every small detail. Morning started early, with soft light slipping through the cracks of the barn as he brought fresh water and feed. He never rushed her. Never pushed more than she could handle. Healing, he knew, didn't work that way. Some days she moved better. Other days, it felt like they were back at the beginning. Still, he showed up the same way each time, steady, patient, consistent. He started talking to her more, not because he expected an answer, but because the silence felt different when he didn't. Low, calm words as he worked. Sometimes about what needed fixing around the ranch. Sometimes about things that didn't matter at all. It wasn't really about the words. It was about the presence. And little by little, she seemed to understand that. At first, she kept her distance, watching him carefully with those same sharp eyes. But then came the small changes. She stopped turning away when he approached. One afternoon, when he reached out, she didn't flinch. His hand hovered for a second before gently resting against her neck. She stayed still. Not tense. Just aware. After that, things shifted. She began to follow him inside the pen, slow but willing, her uneven steps becoming more controlled with time. When he walked away, she watched him, not out of fear, but something closer to curiosity. Trust didn't arrive all at once. It built quietly, moment by moment, in ways that were easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But he was. As the days turned into weeks, her body started to change. The sharp outline of her ribs softened slightly. Her coat, once dull and lifeless, began to carry a faint shine under the sunlight. The limp didn't disappear, but it eased. Each step looked more certain, more deliberate. She carried herself differently now, head a little higher, posture a little stronger, like she was remembering what it felt like to be whole. And somewhere along the way, without either of them noticing exactly when it happened, the distance between them closed. It wasn't just about healing her anymore. Something in him had started to settle too. The long, quiet evenings didn't feel as heavy. The empty spaces didn't echo the same way. There was still loss there, still things that couldn't be undone, but it didn't feel as sharp as before. Taking care of her gave structure to days that had once blurred together. And in return, she gave him something he hadn't realized he was missing, a reason to keep going without questioning it every step of the way. But the ranch didn't care about slow progress or quiet victories. The problems were still there, waiting. The fields hadn't recovered. The numbers didn't add up no matter how many times he went over them. Notices started coming in, polite at first, then less so. Payments overdue. Deadlines closing in. It wasn't just pressure anymore. It was a countdown. One evening, he stood outside the barn, looking over land that no longer felt like his to lose. It felt like something already slipping away. He rubbed the back of his neck, exhaling slowly, the weight of it all settling in again. This wasn't something patience alone could fix. This needed more than time. It needed something he didn't have. A miracle. The thought sat heavy in his mind. For the first time in weeks, doubt crept back in. Not loud. Not overwhelming. Just enough to make him question whether any of this, buying her, trying to fix what couldn't be fixed, had been worth it. Maybe everyone back at the auction had been right. Maybe he had been holding on to something that wasn't going to change anything in the end. He turned to leave, the thought lingering longer than it should have. Behind him, there was a sudden sound, sharp, unexpected. He turned back quickly. The mare had moved. Not just a step. Not the slow, careful motion he was used to seeing. She had crossed the space between them faster than before, her gait still imperfect but stronger, more determined. She stopped a few feet away, ears forward, eyes fixed on him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she took another step. It wasn't about speed. It wasn't about perfection. It was about choice. She didn't have to move toward him. There was no rope, no pressure guiding her. And yet she did. Something shifted again, deeper this time. He didn't say anything. Just stood there, watching her, the doubt from earlier losing its grip piece by piece. Maybe she wasn't fully healed. Maybe the ranch was still in trouble. But this wasn't nothing. And as he reached out, his hand resting against her neck once more, one thought settled quietly into place. She might be more than just a broken horse. The warning didn't come quietly. It arrived in the form of a final notice, folded and stamped, left where it couldn't be ignored. Payment overdue. Final deadline. After that, the land wouldn't be his anymore. He stood there for a long time, the paper held loosely in his hand, the weight of it heavier than anything he'd carried before. This wasn't just another problem. This was the end if he didn't find a way through it. As if that wasn't enough, trouble followed close behind. A section of fencing gave way during the night, worn down by time and neglect. By morning, part of the herd had wandered off toward rough terrain where the ground dropped into uneven hills and narrow paths. It was the kind of place where one wrong step could mean losing more than just cattle. Time mattered. Waiting wasn't an option. He saddled up without thinking twice, then stopped. There was no other horse left. The realization hit fast, sharp enough to steal a breath. The only one standing in that barn was her. The same mare everyone had laughed at. The same one that wasn't supposed to last a week. For a second, doubt surged again, louder this time. This wasn't training. This wasn't routine. This was risk. Real risk. Voices from town echoed in his head, clear as ever. You just bought yourself a problem. He looked at her, standing there, watching him. She wasn't perfect. Not even close. But she wasn't the same as before either. There wasn't time to hesitate. The ride started rough. Her first few steps under the saddle were uncertain, her body adjusting to pressure it hadn't carried in a long time. He kept it light, guiding rather than forcing, but the tension was there, every movement a question of whether she could handle it. They hadn't gone far before the strain showed. Her gait faltered, that old limp threatening to take over again. He felt it instantly, the uneven rhythm beneath him. For a moment, he considered turning back. This was too much. Too soon. But then she steadied. Not perfectly. Not without effort. But she pushed forward. The terrain ahead didn't make things easier. Narrow paths, loose dirt, sharp turns that demanded control and balance. He adjusted with her, matching her pace, trusting her instincts more than his own. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't fast. But it was movement, and right now that was enough. When they reached the scattered cattle, the situation was worse than expected. A few had already moved too far ahead, edging closer to dangerous ground. One wrong move, one loud sound, and they could panic, sending everything into chaos. He took a breath, steadying himself and her. This was the moment. No backup. No second chances. At first, she hesitated. The noise, the movement, the pressure, it was all new, all overwhelming. Her body tensed beneath him, that old uncertainty creeping back in. For a second, it felt like she might shut down completely. Then something shifted. Maybe it was his voice, low and steady like it had been every day before this. Maybe it was the trust they had built, piece by piece. Or maybe it was something in her that refused to break again. She moved. Not perfectly, not without strain, but with purpose. Step by step, she adjusted, responding to his guidance, learning in real time. When the cattle shifted, she followed. When they pushed too far, she cut them off, her movements sharper now, more certain. The limp was still there, but it didn't control her. Not anymore. Time blurred. Dust rose around them as the herd slowly turned back, inch by inch, away from danger. It wasn't quick. It wasn't easy. But it worked. By the time they guided the last of the cattle back toward safer ground, both of them were running on nothing but effort alone. Her breathing was heavy, her body slick with sweat, every step showing the toll it had taken. But she didn't stop. Not until it was done. When they finally came to a halt, silence settled in around them, broken only by the sound of her breathing and his own. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't speak. He just sat there, feeling it, the weight of what had just happened. Back in town, word spread fast. The same people who had laughed before now spoke differently. Not louder, not dramatic, just quieter, more uncertain. They had expected failure. They had been sure of it. Instead, they got something else entirely. Out there, in the fading light, he slid down from the saddle, his legs unsteady as they hit the ground. He reached up, resting a hand against her neck, feeling the heat, the effort still coursing through her. They had made it. The ranch wasn't lost. Not yet. But victory didn't feel loud. It didn't feel easy. It felt like exhaustion, earned the hard way. The days that followed didn't bring sudden riches or an easy life, but something had changed in a way that mattered more. The immediate threat was gone. The cattle were safe, the land still his, for now, and that single moment out on the hills had bought him time he didn't have before. Time to rebuild, to fix what had been falling apart piece by piece. And for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel impossible. Word spread the way it always does in small places. Quick, quiet, and impossible to stop. The same voices that once laughed now spoke with a different tone. Not exaggerated, not overly impressed, just respectful. When he rode into town again, the looks weren't the same. No one smirked. No one joked about wasted money. A few nodded as he passed, simple and subtle, but enough to say everything that needed to be said. He didn't react much to it. Didn't slow down or try to prove anything. He just went about his business like he always had. But somewhere beneath that steady exterior, something settled. Not pride exactly, something quieter than that. The kind of feeling that comes when you take a risk, stand by it, and watch it become something real. Back at the ranch, the changes were even clearer. The fences were being repaired, one section at a time. The barn, though still worn, no longer looked abandoned. The land hadn't fully recovered, but it didn't feel lifeless anymore. There was movement again. Effort. Direction. And in the middle of it all, she stood different than before. The mare that once struggled to stay on her feet now moved with a steady strength. The limp hadn't completely vanished, but it no longer defined her. Her coat carried a healthy shine, catching the sunlight in a way it never had before. Her posture was stronger, her head held higher, her presence impossible to ignore. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. Sometimes, when the work slowed and the day stretched into quiet, he found himself thinking back to that auction. The laughter. The doubt. The moment he almost didn't raise his hand. It would have been easier to walk away, to make the safe choice, to listen to everyone who thought they knew better. But he didn't. And standing there now, watching her move across the field with calm confidence, he understood something he hadn't been able to see back then. It had never really been about fixing something broken. It had been about believing there was still something worth saving in the first place. That belief had changed more than just her. It had changed him too. As the sun dipped low again, painting the sky in warm, fading colors, the ranch settled into its familiar silence. He stepped out toward the fence line where she stood grazing, her movements slow and relaxed. She noticed him before he reached her, lifting her head slightly, ears turning in his direction. For a moment, they just stood there. No urgency. No pressure. Just presence. He stepped closer, resting a hand against her neck, the same way he had done countless times before. This time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty behind it. Just quiet understanding. She didn't move away. The wind brushed softly through the open land, carrying that stillness with it. No crowd. No voices. No doubt. Just the result of a single choice that no one else believed in. And in that quiet, one truth settled deeper than anything else. Sometimes the ones nobody wants end up becoming everything. If this story meant something to you, take a second to show it. Hit that like button so more people can discover it, and share this video with someone who might need a little hope today. And if you want more stories like this, real, emotional, and unforgettable, make sure you subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next one. Your support truly makes these stories possible.